In February 1942, 12 Soviet prisoners vanished during a winter transfer from Stalag VII-A near Munich. German records listed them as deceased, frozen casualties who perished in the brutal Bavarian cold. The official story was clean, tragic, and filed away in dusty archives for nearly 7 decades. But in 2011, construction workers drilling beneath the town of Moosburg discovered something impossible: an elaborate 400-meter tunnel network, complete with sleeping chambers, ventilation shafts, and stolen German uniforms still hanging on makeshift hooks. The tunnels had been sealed. Forensic analysis suggested the men had lived underground for over a year, surviving on supplies that could only have come from inside the camp. And what investigators found in those tunnels would expose a wartime betrayal so explosive it had been protected by 3 governments for 69 years, proving that not all of those 12 prisoners had been Soviet, and not all of them had been killed by Germans. Major Alexei Volkov had spent 8 years staring at death. As a forensic investigator for the Russian Federation's POW-MIA Historical Recovery Division, he'd learned to read the stories written in bone and rust, in rotted fabric and oxidized metal. Death spoke to him in the language of evidence, and he'd become fluent in its grammar. The Moscow office where he worked smelled like old paper and cheap coffee, the fluorescent lights casting everything in the pale green tint of institutional neglect. His desk was covered with files from 1943, a routine case about German prisoner exchanges that nobody cared about anymore. The people involved were all dead. The war they'd fought had ended before Volkov was born, but someone had to catalog the remains, had to give names back to the anonymous dead. That was his job. That was his life. The phone rang at 3:47 p.m. on a Thursday afternoon. Major Volkov. The voice on the other end was German, professional, female. Major, this is Dr. Greta Schneider, calling from the German Federal Archives in Munich. We have a situation that requires Russian expertise. Volkov straightened in his chair. International calls meant something interesting, or at least something complicated. What kind of situation? Construction workers have discovered World War II-era tunnels beneath Moosburg, approximately 40 kilometers northeast of Munich. The site corresponds to the location of Stalag VII-A, a German prisoner of war camp. Preliminary forensic analysis suggests Soviet prisoners were involved in the tunnel construction. Volkov pulled up the digital archives on his computer. Stalag VII-A appeared in his database, a Wehrmacht-operated camp that held Allied prisoners from 1939 to 1945. Standard facility, nothing remarkable in the official records. What makes you think the tunnels involve Soviet prisoners? Dr. Schneider's voice took on an edge of professional excitement. We found remains, Major. 12 sets of human remains, still wearing, fragments of Soviet military uniforms. The tunnels were deliberately sealed. These men were entombed. Volkov felt his pulse quicken. 12 bodies. A sealed tunnel network. This wasn't standard prisoner exchange documentation. I'll need to see the site. That's why I'm calling. The German government is requesting official Russian participation in the forensic recovery. Your name came up because of your tunnel engineering background and your German language skills. When do you need me in Munich? As soon as possible. The construction has been halted, but we're under pressure to resume work. Time is a factor. Volkov glanced at the prisoner exchange files on his desk. They could wait. They'd been waiting since 1943. A few more weeks wouldn't matter. I can be there by Monday. After hanging up, Volkov pulled up everything his database had on Stalag VII-A, standard German records. Prisoner rosters that ran to hundreds of pages. No mention of any tunnel escape or missing prisoners. But there wouldn't be, would there? If the Germans had been embarrassed by an escape, they would have buried the records along with the bodies. He booked his flight to Munich and went home to pack. His apartment was small, neat, functional. The walls were decorated with framed photographs of his grandmother, his mother, his sister's family. The only personal touch was a faded black-and-white photo on his desk, a Soviet Army captain in dress uniform, standing rigid and proud. Young, maybe 25. Dark eyes that stared directly at the camera with the kind of intensity that transcended decades. Captain Dmitry Volkov, his great-grandfather, missing since 1942, presumed dead during a winter transfer from some German camp whose name the family had never learned. The official notification had been brief: lost in transit, no remains recovered, insufficient information for burial honors. Volkov's grandmother had never believed it. She'd insisted Dmitry was too smart, too resourceful to die from simple exposure. He'd been a mining engineer before the war, the kind of man who understood earth and stone and survival. But the German records said he was dead, and the Soviet government had accepted that conclusion. Volkov looked at his great-grandfather's photograph one more time before turning off the lights. Somewhere in the official archives, Dmitry was just another name on a casualty list. Another young man who died in a war that killed millions. The flight to Munich gave Volkov time to review the limited information Dr. Schneider had sent. The tunnel network was extensive, 400 meters of hand-dug passages, reinforced with stolen timber and metal supports. The engineering was sophisticated, showing knowledge of mining techniques and structural support. Whoever built these tunnels knew what they were doing. The construction site looked like organized chaos when Volkov arrived. Yellow police tape cordoned off a massive excavation pit where drilling equipment stood idle. German police cars lined the perimeter, and men in construction helmets argued with officials carrying clipboards. Dr. Schneider met him at the entrance, a woman in her late 50s with steel-gray hair and the no-nonsense demeanor of someone who'd spent her career dealing with bureaucratic obstacles. "Major Volkov," she extended her hand. "Thank you for coming so quickly." "What's the situation?" "The site has been secured as a historical location. The construction company is threatening legal action because we've halted their project, but the forensic evidence is too significant to ignore." She led him toward a blue tent that had been erected over the main tunnel entrance. "We've only explored about 40% of the network. What we've found is remarkable." The tunnel entrance descended steeply into darkness. Volkov followed Dr. Schneider down a ladder into cool, damp air that smelled of earth and decay. Portable lights had been strung along the main passage, revealing smooth walls carved from Bavarian clay and limestone. The tunneling technique was professional. Support beams were positioned at regular intervals. Ventilation shafts had been dug at calculated angles. "This took months," Volkov said, running his hand along the tunnel wall. "Maybe a year of work." "That's our assessment, which creates a problem with the timeline." Dr. Schneider consulted her notes. German records show 12 Soviet prisoners went missing during a winter transfer in February 1942. But this tunnel network couldn't have been constructed in a few weeks. This represents sustained, organized effort over an extended period. They walked deeper into the tunnel system. The main passage branched into smaller corridors, each leading to different chambers. Dr. Schneider pointed out a sleeping area where rotted straw mattresses still lay against the walls. A makeshift kitchen where stolen German cooking equipment had been hidden. A storage chamber containing empty food tins with Wehrmacht labels. "These men were surviving underground," Volkov observed. "They had supply lines into the camp." "Exactly, which suggests cooperation from inside the facility." They reached the central chamber where the forensic team had established their primary work area. 12 sets of remains had been carefully excavated and laid out on examination tables, each tagged and photographed. The bones were clean, preserved by the dry tunnel environment. Fragments of Soviet uniforms still clung to skeletal frames. Personal effects had been placed in labeled evidence bags beside each set of remains. Volkov approached the table slowly, his professional detachment warring with something else. These weren't just casualties to be documented. These were Soviet soldiers who died far from home, whose families had never learned what happened to them. "We're attempting to identify the remains through dental records and personal effects," Dr. Schneider explained. "Several of the soldiers had identification tags, but the metal has corroded. Our lab is working on restoration." Volkov moved to the first examination table. A captain's insignia, tarnished but recognizable, lay beside the remains. He picked it up carefully, feeling the weight of 69 years in the oxidized metal. "May I see the personal effects from this individual?" Dr. Schneider handed him an evidence bag. Inside was a corroded identification tag, a button from a Soviet uniform, and a photograph protected in a waterproof metal case. Volkov opened the case with trembling hands. The photograph showed a young woman holding a baby boy. She stood in front of a wooden house, smiling at the camera with the kind of joy that transcended the poverty visible in the background. On the back of the photograph, faded handwriting: "Natalia and Alexei, 1941." Volkov's blood went cold. He knew this photograph. A copy of it sat on his grandmother's mantel in Moscow. His great-grandmother Natalia holding his grandfather Alexei. The photograph had been sent to Captain Dmitry Volkov at the front in 1941, a reminder of what he was fighting for. "Major?" Dr. Schneider's voice came from far away. "Are you all right?" Volkov picked up the corroded identification tag. The serial number was barely visible beneath decades of oxidation, but he'd memorized it years ago from family documents. The number matched his great-grandfather's military records. Captain Dmitry Volkov, missing since February 1942. Presumed dead during a winter transfer. He wasn't dead in February 1942. He'd survived for over a year in these tunnels. And then something had killed him. Volkov forced himself to breathe normally, to maintain his professional composure. "I'm fine. The tunnel air is affecting me." But he wasn't fine. He was staring at his great-grandfather's remains. The man his family had mourned for 69 years, the man whose death had shaped his grandmother's entire life, hadn't died the way the official records claimed. Dmitry Volkov had been alive, underground, surviving in impossible conditions, and then someone had sealed these tunnels and let him suffocate in the darkness. "Dr. Schneider, I need to examine the tunnel exits." "Of course, we've identified 4 separate exit points, all deliberately sealed." They walked through the tunnel network, Volkov's engineering expertise overriding his emotional turmoil. The exits told a clear story. Professional demolition work, concrete that hadn't been available to prisoners. Explosive charges that had collapsed the passages with calculated precision. Someone with resources and training had sealed these tunnels from the outside. Someone had murdered these 12 men. Near one of the collapsed exits, Volkov found words scratched into the tunnel wall. German, carved with desperate strength. "Sie wussten es. Sie ließen uns sterben." They knew. They let us die. Beneath the German words, a name had been scratched. D. Volkov, his great-grandfather's final message. A testament scratched into stone before the air ran out and the darkness became permanent. Volkov photographed everything: the collapsed exits, the professional demolition work, the message on the wall. His hands were steady, his documentation thorough, but his mind was racing. Someone had let these men die. Someone with authority and resources had decided that 12 Soviet prisoners were expendable. "Major, we should return to the surface," Dr. Schneider said. "You've been down here for 3 hours." Volkov nodded, but he took one last look at the sealed exits. The concrete was too uniform, too professionally applied. This wasn't crude German military work. This was precise, calculated engineering. Back in Dr. Schneider's office at the University of Munich, Volkov filed his initial report with careful language. Preliminary assessment suggests tunnel network was constructed over extended period with sophisticated engineering techniques. Evidence indicates exits were professionally sealed using demolition methods inconsistent with prisoner capabilities or standard German camp security protocols. Recommend further investigation into circumstances of sealing and identification of responsible parties. He didn't mention his great-grandfather. Not yet. He needed time to process what this meant, to understand the implications before making the personal connection official. That night, in his Munich hotel room, Volkov pulled out his laptop and accessed the Russian military archives. He entered his great-grandfather's name and service number, searching for any information beyond the basic casualty notification. The results made his stomach drop. Captain Dmitry Volkov's file had a classification level he'd never seen before. Historical review pending. Access restricted to authorized personnel only. Why would a simple POW casualty have a classified file 69 years after the war ended? Volkov tried accessing the file through his credentials as a POW MIA investigator. Access denied. He tried through his military intelligence clearance. Access denied. The file existed, but someone had locked it at a level above his authority. His phone rang. An internal number from the Moscow office. Major Volkov, this is Colonel Mikhail Petrov calling from the Historical Security Division. I understand you're investigating the Moosburg tunnel discovery. Volkov had never heard of the Historical Security Division. Yes, sir. I'm conducting forensic analysis on behalf of the POW MIA Recovery Division. Major, I've reviewed your preliminary report. This is a sensitive matter. We request that you limit your findings to the official German records and avoid speculation about the circumstances of death. Colonel, the evidence clearly shows these men were deliberately entombed. This wasn't a routine camp casualty. Petrov's voice hardened slightly. Major Volkov, the official story is that 12 Soviet prisoners died during a winter transfer in February 1942. That story has been accepted by all parties for 69 years. I suggest you focus on proper burial arrangements and leave historical analysis to others. With respect, sir, the forensic evidence contradicts the official story. Some questions don't benefit from answers, Major. These men died heroes fighting fascism. Their families have made peace with their loss. Why disturb that peace with speculation about details that can't be changed? Volkov thought about his grandmother, who'd spent 69 years believing her father died from exposure in a winter storm. She hadn't made peace with his loss. She'd spent her entire life wondering what really happened. Colonel, if there are diplomatic considerations, I need to understand them to conduct a proper investigation. The diplomatic consideration, Major, is that certain wartime events involved cooperation between Allied powers that remains classified. The tunnel incident is connected to operations that are still sensitive. You're to document the remains, arrange for proper burial, and close the case. Is that clear? And if I believe the investigation warrants further inquiry, Petrov's voice went cold. Then you'll discover that career advancement depends on understanding when to pursue answers and when to accept that some doors should remain closed. Your grandmother is 70 years old, Major. It would be unfortunate if her final years were troubled by unnecessary questions about her father's service. The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Step back or face consequences for your family. I understand, Colonel. Excellent. I expect your final report within 2 weeks. Cause of death? Exposure and suffocation following tunnel collapse during escape attempt. No evidence of foul play. Standard wartime tragedy. The call ended. Volkov sat in his hotel room, staring at his laptop screen where his great-grandfather's classified file mocked him with its access denied message. Someone very powerful didn't want him investigating how these men really died. someone with enough authority to monitor his investigation from Moscow and make veiled threats about his family. He thought about his great-grandfather's message scratched into the tunnel wall. They knew. They let us die. Who knew? Who had the power to seal those tunnels with professional demolition techniques? Who had the authority to classify Dmitry Volkov's file 69 years after his death? Volkov made his decision. Colonel Petrov could threaten his career. The official story could demand acceptance, but Captain Dmitry Volkov had spent his last conscious moments scratching a message into stone, determined that someone would eventually learn the truth. His great-grandson was going to honor that determination, even if it destroyed everything he'd built. He pulled up his files on Stalag VII-A and began cross-referencing every detail. Guard rosters, transfer records, construction materials, supply manifests. Somewhere in the bureaucratic debris of the Wehrmacht's prisoner administration, there would be evidence of who had access to demolition equipment in March 1943. Somewhere there would be names of people who'd witnessed what really happened when those tunnels were sealed. And Volkov was going to find them, regardless of what Moscow wanted him to discover. Volkov spent 3 days buried in the German Federal Archives, cross-referencing documents that most historians would have found impossibly tedious. Guard rosters, supply requisitions, engineering reports, the kind of bureaucratic minutiae that the Wehrmacht had documented with characteristic German efficiency. Dr. Schneider helped him navigate the archives, her expertise in wartime documentation proving invaluable. She didn't ask why he was suddenly so interested in the administrative details of Stalag VII-A. She simply provided access to filing cabinets that hadn't been opened in decades. "You're looking for something specific," she observed on the third morning, watching him photograph page after page of guard rotation schedules. Volkov didn't look up from the documents. "I'm looking for witnesses. Anyone who might have been at the camp when the tunnels were sealed." "Major, most of those men would be in their 90s now, if they're still alive." "That's why I need to find them quickly." The guard rosters told an interesting story. Stalag VII-A had unusually detailed personnel records for a camp of its size. Every guard was logged, every shift documented, every transfer noted. The Wehrmacht had been obsessive about accountability, even in their prisoner operations. In March 1943, when the tunnels would have been sealed based on forensic analysis, there had been 47 guards assigned to Stalag VII-A. Volkov began the painstaking process of tracking what had happened to each one. Most were dead, killed during the final years of the war, or lost in the chaos of Germany's collapse. Some had emigrated after 1945, their trails going cold in displaced persons camps. But a handful had returned to Bavaria after the war, settling back into civilian life in the towns and villages around Munich. Volkov identified 3 names worth pursuing. Former Wehrmacht guards who'd survived the war, remained in Germany, and might still be alive. The first name on his list was Otto Kraus, age 95, living in a care facility in Freising. Volkov called the facility and asked to speak with Herr Kraus about his wartime service. The nurse who answered was polite, but firm. "Herr Krause doesn't discuss the war. His family's instructions are very clear. No visitors asking about his Wehrmacht service." The second name was Wilhelm Becker, age 93, listed as residing in Ingolstadt. Volkov drove to the address, a small apartment in a post-war housing block. Becker's daughter answered the door, her expression hardening the moment Volkov identified himself as a Russian military investigator. "My father has nothing to say about the camps. Leave us alone." "I'm not here to accuse him of anything. I just need information about—" The door closed in his face. The third name was Hermann Fischer, aged 94, living in a nursing home in Rosenheim. Volkov almost didn't bother calling after the first 2 rejections, but something about Fischer's service record caught his attention. Unlike the other guards, Fischer had been a conscript from a farming family, inducted into the Wehrmacht in 1942 with no previous military experience. His personnel file noted disciplinary issues, fraternization with prisoners, unauthorized absence from duty post, suspected sympathies with the enemy. The kind of notations that suggested Fischer hadn't been an enthusiastic Nazi. Volkov called the nursing home in Rosenheim. The receptionist was professionally courteous. "Herr Fischer is able to receive visitors. Would you like to schedule a time?" "As soon as possible. Today, if he's available." "May I tell him what this is regarding?" Volkov chose his words carefully. "Tell him I'm investigating the tunnels beneath Moosburg. Tell him I have questions about Stalag VII-A in March 1943. There was a pause, muffled conversation in the background. Then the receptionist returned. "Herr Fischer says he can see you this afternoon at 2:00 p.m. He says to tell you he's been waiting a long time for someone to ask him the right questions." The drive from Munich to Rosenheim took an hour through Bavarian countryside that looked postcard perfect in the autumn sunlight. Volkov used the time to research everything he could find about Hermann Fischer. The man had lived a quiet life after the war. Farmer, then municipal worker, then retirement. No criminal record, no political affiliations. Just an ordinary citizen who'd been conscripted into an extraordinary moment in history. But Volkov had also discovered something else during his archival research. Over the past 30 years, 4 different researchers who'd requested files on Stalag VII-A had died in accidents. The pattern was subtle enough to avoid official suspicion, but his forensic training saw it clearly. Dr. Margaret Wilson, British historian specializing in Wehrmacht POW facilities. Fell from a train platform in London, 1987. Official cause, accidental death, possibly intoxication. Thomas Brennan, American journalist researching Allied German prisoner exchanges. Car crash on I-95, 1995. Official cause, fell asleep at the wheel, single vehicle accident. Professor Hans Dietrich, German academic, writing a comprehensive history of Bavarian prison camps. Drowned while swimming alone in the Isar River, 2003. Official cause, heart attack while swimming, body recovered 3 days later. Dr. Yuri Kozlov, Russian archivist investigating Soviet POW casualties. Fatal heart attack in his Moscow apartment, 2008. Official cause, cardiac arrest, natural causes for a man of 67 with existing heart condition. 4 deaths, spread over 2 decades, each one explainable, each one tragic, but unremarkable. Except they'd all been researching Stalag VII-A. They'd all requested access to files about the 1942-1943 period, and they'd all died before publishing their findings. Volkov had made copies of all his evidence before leaving Munich, distributing them to 3 different locations. If something happened to him, Dr. Schneider would know where to find the documentation. He'd learned caution from years of recovery work in conflict zones. But this felt different. This wasn't battlefield forensics. This was something that reached across 7 decades with patience and lethal efficiency. The nursing home in Rosenheim was a modern facility with well-maintained grounds and the antiseptic smell of institutional care. The receptionist directed Volkov to the 3rd floor, private rooms section. Hermann Fischer's door was open, revealing a small but comfortable space filled with books and a single photograph on the desk. Volkov knocked softly. "Herr Fischer?" The old man sitting by the window turned slowly. Age had carved deep lines in his face, but his eyes were sharp, intelligent, haunted. He wore a cardigan over a pressed shirt, his white hair neatly combed. The photograph on his desk showed a young Wehrmacht guard standing uncomfortably beside Soviet prisoners at what Volkov recognized as Stalag VII-A. "Major Volkov," Fischer's voice was steady despite his age. "Come in. Close the door, please." Volkov did as instructed, taking the chair Fischer indicated across from him. Fisher studied Volkov's face for a long moment. "You look like him? The same eyes? The same expression? Your great-grandfather had that look, the one that sees too much and refuses to look away." Volkov's carefully prepared questions died in his throat. "You knew Captain Volkov?" "I knew Dmitri. We talked many times when I was on guard duty. He taught me about Soviet poetry, about the Ural Mountains where he grew up, about the wife and son he'd left behind." Fisher's eyes filled with tears. "I killed him, Major. Not with my hands, but with my silence. I've been waiting 69 years for someone to ask me about it." Volkov pulled out his notebook, then stopped. "Herr Fisher, before you say anything, I need to tell you that this conversation may be recorded by others. There are people who don't want the truth about Stalag VII-A to come out. What you tell me could put you in danger." Fisher smiled sadly. "Major, I'm 94 years old. I've lived with this secret since I was 20. Danger is a release, not a threat." "Tell me what happened." Fisher gestured to the window, looking out at the Bavarian Alps in the distance. "I was a farmer's son from a village outside Munich. Conscripted in 1942, sent to Stalag VII-A because I was too weak for frontline service. I hated everything about the war, the uniforms, the ideology, the cruelty. But I was 20 years old and terrified of being shot for cowardice." He turned back to Volkov. "The Soviet prisoners fascinated me. They were supposed to be subhuman according to Nazi propaganda, but they were just men, frightened, homesick, desperate. I started talking to them during guard duty. Dmitri was different from the others. He was educated, intelligent, spoke some German. We became, not friends exactly, but something close to it. In early 1943, I was contacted by a Polish resistance fighter who worked in the camp kitchen. He told me the British wanted information about German military movements, camp conditions, anything useful. I agreed to help. It gave me a purpose beyond pointing a rifle at starving men." Fisher stood and walked to his desk, pulling out a waterproof envelope from a locked drawer. His hand shook as he opened it. "What I'm about to tell you, Major, I've never told anyone. Not the British who recruited me, not my wife before she died, not the priests who heard my confessions. This secret has been my companion for 69 years. He spread documents across the desk, yellowed papers, photographs, a typed military order with official stamps. In January 1943, a new prisoner arrived at Stalag VII-A. Sergeant Viktor Petrov, captured near Stalingrad. He integrated into the Soviet prisoner group quickly. Too quickly. Dmitri noticed immediately. What did he notice? Small things. Petrov's Russian had a slight accent. His knowledge of Soviet military procedures was oddly formal. His stories about his unit didn't match with other prisoners' experiences. Dmitri was NKVD intelligence before the war. He knew how to spot inconsistencies. Volkov leaned forward. Petrov was a plant. His real name was Klaus Weber, ethnic German from Soviet territories who'd been recruited by German counterintelligence. The plan was elegant. The Germans would stage a tunnel escape, making the security deliberately lax. Weber would escape with genuine Soviet prisoners and use them to infiltrate partisan networks operating in occupied territories. Once inside the partisan command structure, he'd feed German intelligence information about operations, supply routes, personnel. Fisher pulled out a photograph showing a man in Soviet uniform. The face was sharp, calculating, nothing like the other prisoner photographs Volkov had seen. Dmitri figured it out within 2 weeks. Weber made a mistake, used a German idiom that no Soviet soldier would know. Dmitri tested him with questions about Soviet regional dialects, military slang, political commissar procedures. Weber failed every test. What did Dmitri do? He contacted me, told me what he'd discovered, asked me to pass a message to my British contacts, warning them about Weber's mission. Fisher's voice grew heavy. I sent the message through my Polish contact. 3 days later, I received a response. The British acknowledged Dmitri's intelligence and said they would take appropriate action. Fisher pulled out a typed message on aged paper. This is what they sent. Intelligence received regarding German infiltrator among Soviet prisoners. Matter will be handled appropriately. Maintain operational security. Do not discuss with prisoners. It was signed by someone using the codename Blackbird. Did you show this to Dmitri? Yes, he was relieved. He thought the British would help him expose Weber, maybe extract the genuine Soviet prisoners to safety. We were naive, Major. We thought Allied intelligence meant Allied cooperation. Fisher sat back down, his face pale. On the night of March 14, 1943, 12 Soviet prisoners, including Dmitri and Weber, disappeared through the tunnels they'd been building for months. I was on duty that night. I saw them enter the tunnel entrance beneath the camp barracks. And you didn't report it? I was ordered not to. My Polish contact told me the British wanted the escape to proceed, that they had a plan to intercept the prisoners and expose Weber's infiltration. I thought they were going to rescue Dmitri and the others. Fisher's hands clenched into fists. The next night, March 15th, American officers arrived at the camp. Not British, American. 3 men in civilian clothes with U.S. military credentials. They brought engineering equipment, demolition supplies, concrete. They worked through the night, sealing every tunnel exit with professional precision. Volkov's blood went cold. The Americans sealed the tunnels? I watched from the guard tower. I heard the muffled screams as the prisoners realized what was happening. The sounds lasted for hours. Men pounding on sealed concrete, their voices growing weaker as the air ran out. Fisher's voice broke. Dmitri was down there. The British had promised to help him. Instead, they sent Americans to bury him alive. Why? Why would Allied intelligence murder Soviet prisoners? Fisher pulled out another document, a typed order on American military letterhead, dated March 15, 1943. Authorization for containment operation Naribay Stalag VII-A tunnel network. Objective: prevent German infiltrator Klaus Weber from reaching Soviet partisan networks. Method: permanent sealing of all tunnel exits using demolition techniques. Classification: ultra-secret, no Soviet notification. Authority: Combined Chiefs of Staff. Operational Commander: Lieutenant Richard Hartley, Office of Strategic Services. Volkov read the order 3 times, his mind struggling to process the implications. They killed all 12 prisoners to stop one German infiltrator. It was a calculation, Major. Weber's mission would have compromised partisan networks throughout Eastern Europe. Hundreds, maybe thousands of Allied operatives would have been captured and killed. But capturing Weber would have exposed how deeply German intelligence had penetrated Soviet operations, potentially damaging Allied-Soviet cooperation at a critical point in the war. Fisher's voice hardened. So Lieutenant Richard Hartley made a decision. Kill all 12 prisoners. The genuine Soviet soldiers would be sacrificed along with the IE. German infiltrator. Cleaner that way. No loose ends, no diplomatic complications. How did you get this document? I stole it from the desk of the German liaison officer who'd been coordinating with the Americans. He'd left it out carelessly, probably because he never expected a lowly guard to be able to read English. Fisher's smile was bitter. I've kept it hidden for 69 years. Insurance, you might say. Proof that I'm not insane, that I didn't imagine what I witnessed. Volkov studied the order. The signature was clear. Richard Hartley, First Lieutenant, OSS. The stamps were authentic. This was genuine U.S. military documentation of mass murder. Herr Fisher, why didn't you come forward with this after the war? Because I was a coward. Fisher's voice was flat, emotionless. The war ended. I went home to my farm. I tried to forget. But then, in the 1950s, I started reading about this brilliant young American intelligence officer named Richard Hartley, helping to build the CIA, fighting communism, becoming a hero of the Cold War. Fisher pulled out a newspaper clipping from 1963, a photograph of a distinguished man in his 40s receiving a medal from President Kennedy. The face was older, but recognizable from the signature on the tunnel sealing order. He'd built a career on that decision, Major. Killing 12 men became the foundation of his reputation for making hard choices under impossible circumstances. I realized that if I came forward, I'd be dismissed as a bitter ex-Nazi trying to smear an American hero. Nobody would believe me. And the other researchers? The ones who died? Fisher nodded slowly. I'm not the only one who knew about the tunnels. There were other guards, German officers, Polish resistance fighters. Over the years, some of them tried to tell the truth. They all died in convenient accidents before they could publish anything. He pulled out a list of names. Volkov recognized several from his own research. I watched them die one by one, Major. Each time someone got close to exposing what really happened, they suffered an unfortunate accident. A fall, a car crash, a heart attack. Richard Hartley has been protecting his secret for 69 years by eliminating anyone who threatens to expose it. Volkov felt sick. He's still alive? General Richard Hartley retired, lives in Virginia, 92 years old, still has connections throughout the intelligence community, still has the power to make problems disappear. Fisher's eyes locked on Volkov's. And now that you've found the tunnels, now that you're asking questions, you've become a problem. As if summoned by Fisher's words, Volkov's phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Major Volkov, you're investigating matters that ended 69 years ago. For your family's safety, return to Moscow immediately. This is your only warning. Volkov showed the message to Fisher, who nodded sadly. It's starting. He knows you're here. He knows what I've told you. How could he possibly know? Because Richard Hartley has spent 7 decades building a network of people who owe him favors, who depend on his secrets staying buried, who will do anything to protect the reputation of American intelligence. You're not fighting one 92-year-old man, Major. You're fighting an institution. Volkov stood and began photographing every document Fisher had shown him. The tunnel sealing order, the photographs, the list of dead researchers. Fisher watched him work with the patient sadness of someone who'd given up hope long ago. What will you do with this evidence, Major? I'm going to expose what happened. I'm going to make sure the world knows that my great-grandfather died trying to prevent a German infiltration and that Allied intelligence rewarded his loyalty by burying him alive. Fisher smiled. Your great-grandfather would be proud. He was the bravest man I ever met. Even at the end, even when he knew what was happening, he was thinking about others. What do you mean? The night before the Americans sealed the tunnels, Dmitri pulled me aside during my guard shift. He knew something was wrong. The British had promised help, but nothing was happening. He gave me a message to pass to Soviet intelligence if anything happened to him. He said he'd hidden evidence in the tunnels, proof of Weber's identity and the German infiltration plan. Volkov's pulse quickened. What kind of evidence? Intelligence reports he'd compiled over months. Intercepted German communications, Weber's inconsistencies, the German infiltration plan. Dmitri said he'd sealed them in a waterproof case and hidden them behind a false wall in the tunnels. Fisher's expression grew intense. If you can find that evidence, Major, you'll have proof that wasn't just created by an old German guard. You'll have your great-grandfather's own words, documentation that Allied intelligence chose to ignore. Do you know where in the tunnels? Dmitri said it was in the main sleeping chamber, behind the 4th support beam from the entrance. He carved a mark on the beam, a small star. Soviet military insignia. Volkov checked his watch. 4:30 p.m. Dr. Schneider would still be at the tunnel site, supervising the forensic team's continued excavation. "Herr Fischer, I need to ask you to come with me to Munich. Your testimony will be crucial to exposing what happened." Fischer shook his head. "Major, I'm 94 years old. I've lived my entire adult life with this guilt. I'm ready to face whatever consequences come from telling the truth. But I can't leave this facility. My health is too fragile." "Then I'll arrange protection for you. If Hartley knows I've been here—" "He already knows. The moment you walked through that door, sensors were triggered, calls were made." Fischer gestured to his room. "There are no cameras here, no listening devices that I've found. But they've been monitoring who visits me for years. Why do you think the other guards refuse to see you? Their families know what happens to people who talk about Stalag VII-A." Volkov felt paranoid tension building in his chest. "We need to get you somewhere safe." "Major, go back to the tunnels. Find Dmitri's evidence. That's what matters. My life is measured in months at most. But the truth could last forever." Volkov gathered his photographs and notes. "I'll come back tomorrow with proper security arrangements." "You do what you need to do. But, Major—" Fischer's voice stopped him at the door. "Your great-grandfather spent his last hours scratching messages into those tunnel walls. He wanted someone to know what really happened. You're the one who's going to tell that story. Don't let Richard Hartley's threats stop you from honoring that." Volkov left the nursing home at 5:15 p.m. as the autumn sun began setting behind the Bavarian Alps. His mind was racing, trying to process the implications of everything Fischer had revealed. Allied intelligence had deliberately murdered 12 men to prevent a German infiltrator from compromising partisan networks. Richard Hartley had built a career on that decision and spent 69 years protecting it. He was halfway to his rental car when he noticed the black Mercedes parked across the street. 2 men in dark suits sat in the front seats, watching him. When Volkov looked directly at them, the driver raised a phone to his ear, maintaining eye contact the entire time. Professional surveillance, no attempt to hide, just a clear message. "We know where you are." Volkov got into his rental car and pulled out of the parking lot. The Mercedes followed at a careful distance. Not close enough to be threatening, but close enough to be obvious. Volkov had been trained in counter-surveillance during his military intelligence posting, but this felt different. These weren't Russian operatives trying to remain hidden. These were Americans making sure he knew he was being watched. He took a series of random turns through Rosenheim's residential streets, confirming the tale. The Mercedes stayed with him through every turn, never losing sight of his vehicle. When Volkov stopped at a red light, the Mercedes pulled alongside him in the next lane. The passenger window rolled down. The man in the passenger seat was in his 40s, fit, with the buzz cut and bearing of ex-military. He looked directly at Volkov and made a phone call, his lips forming words Volkov could partially read. He made contact with Fischer. The light changed. The Mercedes drove off in a different direction. Volkov's hands shook on the steering wheel. They weren't just watching him. They were confirming what he'd learned, reporting to someone who was coordinating a response. His phone buzzed with another text. "Your grandmother is 70 years old, Major. It would be a shame if her final years were troubled by unnecessary stress. Return to Moscow. Stop asking questions." The threat was explicit now. Not just his career, his family. Volkov pulled into a rest stop and sat in his car, forcing himself to think clearly. He had Fischer's evidence photographed and stored on his phone and laptop. But he needed more. He needed Dmitri's intelligence reports from inside the tunnels. Physical proof that couldn't be dismissed as the confused memories of a 94-year-old German guard. He called Dr. Schneider. "Greta, it's Alexei. I need to access the tunnels tonight." "Tonight?" "Major, it's almost 6:01 p.m. The forensic team has gone home." "I know. I need to search for something without official observation." There was a pause. Dr. Schneider was too intelligent not to understand the implications. "Major, what exactly have you found?" "Evidence that the tunnel sealing wasn't done by Germans, evidence that Allied intelligence murdered those prisoners deliberately." "Mein Gott!" Her voice dropped to a whisper. "Alexei, if what you're saying is true, this could create international incidents. The Americans, the British, they won't want this exposed." "I know. That's why I need to work quickly. Can you give me access to the site?" Another pause. "I'll meet you there at 8 p.m. But, Alexei, be careful. If someone doesn't want this information public, they may take steps to prevent you from finding it." Volkov drove back toward Munich, checking his rearview mirror constantly. No black Mercedes, no obvious tail. But that didn't mean he wasn't being tracked. Modern surveillance used GPS, traffic cameras, cell phone signals. If the Americans wanted to know where he was going, they'd have multiple ways of monitoring him. He stopped at an electronics store in Munich and bought a cheap prepaid phone, transferring his research photos to an encrypted cloud storage account before destroying the SIM card in his regular phone. Paranoid, maybe. But the threat was real. Dr. Schneider met him at the Moosburg tunnel site at 8 p.m. exactly. The construction area was dark except for security lights around the perimeter. She'd brought equipment from the university's archaeology lab: portable lights, digging tools, documentation cameras. "The security guard knows I'm here conducting additional research," she said. "We have until 11 p.m., before his next scheduled patrol." They descended into the tunnels, the darkness pressing in around them, despite the portable lights. Volkov led Dr. Schneider to the main sleeping chamber where the remains had been found. The forensic team had removed the bodies, leaving only the outline markers where each set of remains had been located. Volkov counted the support beams from the entrance. 4th beam. He examined it carefully with his flashlight, looking for any marks or unusual features. There, scratched into the wood near the base, a 5-pointed star. Soviet military insignia. "Greta, help me check the wall behind this beam." They examined the tunnel wall, looking for inconsistencies in the clay and stone. Dr. Schneider's archaeological expertise proved invaluable. She identified a section where the wall material looked slightly different, more recent despite being 69 years old. "Here, this section was disturbed and then sealed. Someone created a cavity and filled it in." They carefully excavated the false wall, using precise archaeological techniques to avoid damaging whatever might be hidden inside. After 20 minutes of careful work, Volkov's trowel hit something metal. A waterproof military case, Soviet manufacture, approximately 30 centimeters long and 15 centimeters wide. It had been sealed with wax and wrapped in oilcloth. The preservation was remarkable. Volkov's hands trembled as he opened the case. Inside were documents written on scraps of paper, German military forms stolen from camp offices, even pages torn from books. The handwriting was small, precise, economical. Captain Dmitry Volkov's intelligence reports compiled over months of observation and investigation. "Greta, I need to photograph everything immediately." They spread the documents out carefully. Volkov read as he photographed, his great-grandfather's voice speaking to him across 7 decades. January 28, 1943. New prisoner arrived today. Claims to be Sergeant Viktor Petrov, 308th Rifle Division, captured near Stalingrad. Story contains multiple inconsistencies, use of German idioms, unfamiliarity with Soviet military protocols. Regional accent doesn't match claimed origin. Recommend investigation. February 3, 1943. Confirmed Petrov is German plant. Real name Klaus Weber. Mission appears to be infiltration of partisan networks through staged escape. Germans deliberately weakening security to facilitate tunnel construction. Warning sent to Allied contacts through Polish intermediary. February 15, 1943. Allied intelligence acknowledged my reports about Weber. Codename Blackbird sent response indicating appropriate action will be taken. Relieved, thought British would help expose infiltration. March 10, 1943. Something wrong. No help coming. Weber pressuring for escape attempt. Other prisoners don't know he's German agent. If we escape, he'll compromise entire partisan command structure in Eastern territories. Sent urgent message to Blackbird requesting immediate extraction or exposure of Weber. March 14, 1943. Forced to enter tunnels with Weber and 10 other prisoners. No choice. If I refuse, Weber becomes suspicious. Allied intelligence promised to intercept us at exit points, trusting British word. March 15, 1943. 0300 hours. They're sealing the exits. Can hear demolition work from outside. Americans, not British. We've been betrayed. Weber realizes too late that Germans used him. All of us expendable. Air running out. If anyone finds this, know that I tried to prevent German infiltration. Allied intelligence chose our deaths over diplomatic complications. Blackbird is traitor to us all. Hermann Fischer has proof. Trust him. Tell my family I died serving Soviet. Union. Tell them I love them. D. Volkov. Volkov had to stop reading as tears blurred his vision. His great-grandfather's last words, written in the darkness as the air slowly suffocated him. Dmitri had known he was going to die. He'd spent his final conscious moments documenting the truth. Dr. Schneider gripped his arm. Alexei, I'm so sorry. He tried to save them. Dmitri discovered the infiltration, reported it to Allied intelligence, and they killed him for it. Volkov's voice was thick with rage and grief. Lieutenant Richard Hartley received these warnings and decided mass murder was the appropriate response. He found another document in the case, a copy of a communication from Blackbird to Dmitri, captured through the Polish resistance network. Intelligence regarding German infiltrator received and confirmed. Operation Nightingale authorized to neutralize threat, maintain position, extraction protocols in progress. Blackbird. Operation Nightingale. Dr. Schneider read the message. That was the code name for the tunnel sealing. It wasn't an extraction operation. It was an execution. Volkov photographed every document, every scrap of paper that represented his great-grandfather's final investigation. This was proof. Not just Fischer's testimony or stolen German documents, but Dmitri's own intelligence reports, written in his hand, documenting everything. They were repacking the case when Volkov heard vehicles approaching the tunnel site. Multiple engines, moving fast. Greta, we need to leave now. They scrambled up the tunnel ladder toward the surface. As Volkov emerged from the entrance, he saw 3 black SUVs pulling into the construction site, their headlights illuminating the area like day. Men in dark suits were getting out, moving with military precision. Dr. Schneider climbed out behind him, her face pale. Alexei, who are these people? Americans, here to stop me from exposing what Hartley did. One of the men approached, pulling out credentials. Major Volkov, I'm Agent Collins, FBI legal attaché. We need to have a conversation about classified materials you've obtained illegally. I'm a Russian military officer conducting authorized forensic investigation. You have no jurisdiction here. We're coordinating with German authorities. You're in possession of documents related to U.S. intelligence operations. Those documents are classified and must be surrendered immediately. Dr. Schneider stepped forward. This is a German archaeological site. You have no authority to... Dr. Schneider, I suggest you step away. This doesn't concern you. Volkov calculated his options. 6 armed men, no clear escape route. His evidence was on his phone and laptop, but they'd confiscate both within minutes. Then his new prepaid phone buzzed in his pocket. A text from Dr. Schneider's number. Alexei, run. I activated the university's media protocol. Multiple journalists have been sent everything you found today. The IAM story is already breaking. They can't stop it. Volkov looked at Dr. Schneider, who gave him the slightest nod. She'd transmitted everything to the university's secure server before they entered the tunnels, a standard protocol for protecting controversial archaeological discoveries. The Americans could confiscate his devices, but the evidence was already spreading beyond their control. "Agent Collins, you're too late. The documents have been released to international media. Your operation is blown." Collins's expression hardened. "Major Volkov, you've just committed multiple felonies related to the handling of classified materials. You're under arrest." "On what authority? I'm a Russian national on German soil conducting authorized research." "On the authority of the NATO Status of Forces Agreement and the Espionage Act. You're in possession of stolen U.S. intelligence documents. That's a crime in any NATO country." Volkov felt the trap closing around him. They weren't going to let him walk away. Hartley had triggered whatever protocols existed for containing intelligence breaches, and those protocols apparently included arresting foreign military officers who threatened to expose war crimes. His prepaid phone buzzed again, this time from an unknown number. "Major, if you wish to live long enough to tell your great-grandfather's story, get in the green Volkswagen parked on the street behind the construction site. You have 60 seconds before Collins's team secures the perimeter. Herman Fischer's friends." Volkov looked around. He could see a green Volkswagen idling on the access road 50 meters away. Dr. Schneider saw it too. "Go, Alexei. I'll handle the Americans." "Greta, they'll arrest you for helping me." "Let them try. I'm a German citizen on German soil protecting German archaeological integrity." She smiled grimly. "And I have tenure. That means I can cause bureaucratic nightmares that will last years." Volkov made his decision. He ran toward the access road as Agent Collins shouted commands behind him. He heard footsteps pursuing, but he had a head start, and he'd been trained for this. He reached the Volkswagen and threw himself into the passenger seat. The driver was a woman in her 60s with silver hair and the calm demeanor of someone used to emergency situations. She accelerated smoothly away from the construction site as Collins's team reached the street. "I'm Dr. Elena Rostov," she said in Russian-accented English. "Herman Fischer called me 3 hours ago. Told me you might need help when the Americans figured out what you'd discovered." "Who are you?" "Russian Foreign Intelligence Service, retired. Herman and I worked together during the Cold War. He saved my life twice. I owe him." Volkov looked back through the rear window. The SUVs weren't pursuing. They'd secured Dr. Schneider instead, probably hoping to use her as leverage. They arrested Dr. Schneider. "She'll be released within 24 hours. German authorities don't appreciate American intelligence agencies making arrests on their territory without proper coordination. The diplomatic protests are already being filed." Elena navigated through Munich's evening traffic with professional skill. "Major Volkov, Herman told me what you found in the tunnels. Your great-grandfather's reports, the proof that Hartley ordered the execution." "How much do you know about Operation Nightingale?" "Enough to know that the Americans have been protecting this secret for 69 years. Richard Hartley is one of their intelligence legends. Exposing him as a war criminal would damage their entire historical narrative about the moral superiority of Western intelligence operations." Volkov's hands were still shaking from the adrenaline. "Herman Fischer said the evidence has been shared with journalists. Is that true?" Dr. Schneider uploaded everything to a secure server maintained by the University of Munich's Conflict Archaeology Department. The university has strict protocols about protecting controversial findings from government suppression. Multiple international media outlets received the files simultaneously. BBC, Le Monde, Der Spiegel, several Russian news agencies. The story is already breaking. Elena handed him a tablet showing news websites. The headlines were beginning to appear. Soviet POWs murdered by Allied intelligence in World War II. American officer ordered execution of prisoners to prevent infiltration. 69-year cover-up exposed. Tunnels reveal dark secret of Allied intelligence. Volkov felt something between relief and terror. The truth was out, but so was he, now a fugitive from American intelligence agencies who'd committed their resources to containing the story. Where are we going? Somewhere the Americans can't easily reach you. Russian consulate in Frankfurt. You'll have diplomatic protection there while we figure out next steps. Volkov looked at the tablet again, scrolling through the breaking news stories. His great-grandfather's face appeared in several articles, a photograph taken before the war showing a young Soviet captain in dress uniform. The same photograph Volkov kept on his desk in Moscow. But there was another photograph that made his blood run cold. The lead story on Der Spiegel showed a distinguished elderly man in an expensive suit, General Richard Hartley, retired U.S. intelligence officer. The article began, "International media has received documents allegedly proving that General Richard Hartley, highly decorated veteran and author, ordered the execution of 12 Soviet prisoners of war in 1943 to prevent a German infiltration of Allied partisan networks. Hartley could not be reached for comment. U.S. State Department issued a statement calling the allegations baseless and defamatory." "They'll deny everything," Volkov said. "Of course they will. But denial becomes harder when you have physical evidence, eyewitness testimony, and a paper trail." Elena glanced at him. "Major, did you really find your great-grandfather's intelligence reports in those tunnels?" Every word Dmitri wrote during his final months. Documentation of how he discovered Klaus Weber's true identity, how he warned Allied intelligence, how Lieutenant Hartley acknowledged the reports and then chose to murder all the prisoners rather than risk Weber's infiltration. "Then you have what every investigator dreams of. Proof that survives across generations." Elena's voice grew serious. "But you also have what every intelligence service fears, evidence that can't be classified away or dismissed as conspiracy theory. Hartley will fight back. He'll use every resource at his disposal to discredit you, to suppress the evidence, to protect his reputation." Volkov's phone buzzed, his original phone, the one with the destroyed SIM card. How was it receiving messages? The text was from an unknown number. "Major Volkov, we need to discuss your great-grandfather's unfortunate death. Some conversations are better had privately. R.H. R.H. Richard Hartley." After 69 years of hiding, the man who'd murdered Dmitri Volkov wanted to talk to his great-grandson. Volkov showed the message to Elena. Her expression darkened. "He's scared. Good. He should be. Should I respond?" "That depends on whether you want to negotiate or destroy him." Volkov thought about his great-grandfather dying in the darkness, scratching final messages into tunnel walls. Thought about Hermann Fischer living with guilt for 7 decades. Thought about the 4 researchers who died mysterious deaths because they got too close to the truth. "I want to destroy him." Elena smiled grimly. "Then welcome to the war your great-grandfather started in 1943. Let's finish what he began." They drove through the night toward Frankfurt, toward temporary safety behind diplomatic walls. But Volkov knew this was just the beginning. Hartley had resources, connections, and the desperate motivation of someone whose entire legacy was built on a secret that was now unraveling. Behind them, at the nursing home in Rosenheim, Hermann Fischer sat in his room and waited. He'd made his call to Elena Rostov, had set in motion the protection protocols for Major Volkov. Now there was nothing left but to wait and see if the truth he'd carried for 69 years would finally bring justice. At 11:47 p.m., Fischer received his own visitor, a man in his 40s, professionally dressed, carrying a medical bag. "Good evening, Herr Fischer. I'm Dr. Weber from the Emergency Medical Service. The facility reported you were experiencing chest pains." Fischer smiled sadly. He'd never reported chest pains. He knew exactly who this man was and why he was here. "Tell Hartley I died bravely. Tell him I regret nothing." The man calling himself Dr. Weber pulled out a syringe. "You won't feel anything. It will appear to be a heart attack, very common for men your age. The truth is already out. Killing me won't stop it." "No, but it sends a message to Major Volkov about what happens to people who threaten American intelligence operations." Fisher closed his eyes, thinking of Dmitry Volkov scratching final messages into tunnel walls. Thinking of the 11 other prisoners who'd suffocated in the darkness. Thinking of the 4 researchers who'd died over the decades trying to expose this truth. "I've been dead since 1943, he whispered. "I just kept breathing out of habit." The injection was painless. Hermann Fischer died at 12:03 a.m., 69 years and 7 months after he watched American officers seal the tunnels beneath Stalag VII-A. The nursing home receptionist found him at 6:30 a.m. during morning rounds. The doctor who examined the body determined the cause of death: cardiac arrest, natural causes, common for a man of 94 with existing heart conditions. No autopsy was performed. By the time Major Alexei Volkov received the news that his primary witness was dead, he was safely inside the Russian consulate in Frankfurt, surrounded by diplomatic security and planning his next move against the man who'd murdered his great-grandfather. The war between past and present was fully engaged now, and everyone involved understood that only one side would survive. The call came at 7:15 a.m. Elena Rostov woke Volkov in his quarters at the Russian consulate, her face grave. "Hermann Fischer died last night. Heart attack. The nursing home found him this morning." Volkov sat up, the news hitting him like physical impact. "They killed him." "Almost certainly. The timing is too convenient. He talks to you, provides evidence against Hartley, and dies 12 hours later." Elena handed him a secure tablet showing German news coverage. "The official story is natural causes. No autopsy was ordered." Volkov felt rage building in his chest. Fischer had waited 69 years to tell the truth, had finally found the courage to expose what happened, and Hartley had eliminated him before he could testify publicly. How many people has Hartley killed to protect this secret? At least 7 that we can confirm. 4 researchers over 3 decades, Hermann Fischer last night, and probably 2 others who got too close in the 1950s. Elena pulled up files on her laptop. Hartley has spent almost 7 decades perfecting the art of making murder look like accident or natural causes. Volkov's secure phone buzzed. Another message from Richard Hartley. "Major Volkov, I'm sorry to hear about Herr Fischer's passing. Such a tragic loss. Perhaps now you understand the stakes involved. Some secrets are protected by people with resources you can't imagine. Let's talk before anyone else experiences unfortunate health problems." The threat was explicit. Stop investigating or more people die. "He's threatening my family," Volkov said quietly. "He's threatening everyone you care about. That's how he's maintained this cover-up for decades. Fear, intimidation, and the occasional demonstration of his reach." Elena's voice hardened. "But he's made a mistake this time. He's killed Fischer after the evidence was already released. That makes him look desperate instead of powerful." Volkov opened the news feeds on the tablet. The story was spreading faster than he'd imagined. International media was running detailed coverage of the Moosburg tunnels, the intelligence reports, Fischer's testimony before his death. Dmitry Volkov's face appeared in dozens of articles, his story finally being told after 69 years of silence. But so was Hartley's response. The U.S. State Department had issued multiple statements calling the allegations Soviet propaganda designed to damage American intelligence operations. Hartley himself had released a statement through his attorney. These baseless accusations are the work of Russian intelligence services attempting to rewrite history. The documents are forgeries, the testimony is unreliable, and the entire story is a calculated smear campaign against American heroes. "He's fighting back," Volkov observed. "Of course, his entire legacy is built on this secret. If the truth is accepted, he goes from intelligence legend to war criminal." Elena gestured to another news article. "But he's losing the information war. German forensic experts have confirmed the authenticity of the tunnel site and the remains. British historians are corroborating details about Operation Nightingale. Even American academics are starting to question the official narrative." Volkov scrolled through the coverage, seeing his great-grandfather's story spreading across the world. But he also saw Hartley's counter-narrative gaining traction in some outlets. Russian intelligence operation, forged documents, discredited sources. The evidence is real, but half the world will believe it's fabricated. Hartley has 69 years of credibility behind him. "Which is why you need to confront him directly," Elena said. "Get him to admit what he did on record. A confession from Richard Hartley himself is the only thing that can't be dismissed as Russian propaganda." "He'll never confess." "He might if he thinks he can negotiate, if he believes confession is the only way to control the narrative." Elena pulled up a file on her laptop. "Hartley is 92 years old. He's wealthy, connected, surrounded by people who owe him favors. But he's also desperate. His legacy is collapsing in real time. Desperate men make mistakes." Volkov studied Hartley's photograph on the screen. Distinguished, grandfatherly, wearing his medals and honors like armor. This was the man who'd ordered 12 prisoners buried alive. The man who'd spent 7 decades eliminating anyone who threatened to expose his crime. How do I get to him? He's in the United States, surrounded by security, protected by people who need his secrets buried. You force him to come to you. You offer him something he can't refuse. Elena's smile was cold. You offer him a way to spin the story, to maintain some control over his legacy. Men like Hartley can accept being seen as pragmatic decision-makers who made hard choices. They can't accept being seen as murderers. What do you propose? Call him. Tell him you have additional evidence that hasn't been released yet. Evidence that proves Dmitri discovered not just Klaus Weber, but a larger German infiltration network. Tell him you're willing to discuss how to present this information in a way that frames Operation Nightingale as a necessary wartime decision rather than mass murder. You want me to offer him a deal? I want you to make him think you're offering a deal. Get him to meet with you, somewhere neutral but monitored. Record everything. Let him talk about how he made difficult decisions under impossible circumstances. Let his own words convict him. Volkov thought about Fischer's testimony, about the 4 dead researchers, about his great-grandfather's final messages scratched into tunnel walls. Everyone involved in this conspiracy had died or been silenced except Richard Hartley. It was time to change that pattern. Where would he agree to meet? Somewhere he feels safe but official. The U.S. Embassy in Berlin would be perfect. He can claim diplomatic protection, but it's also under German jurisdiction and international observation. If you record him there, the Americans can't easily suppress the evidence. Volkov picked up his secure phone and typed a message to Hartley's number. General Hartley, I have additional intelligence reports from Dmitry Volkov that haven't been released. They detail a larger German infiltration network that would justify Operation Nightingale as strategic necessity rather than war crime. I'm willing to discuss how to present this information to protect all parties involved. Meet me at U.S. Embassy Berlin tomorrow, 2 p.m. Bring your documentation of the operation. This is your only chance to control the narrative. He showed the message to Elena before sending it. Perfect. You're offering him exactly what he wants, a way to be the hero again instead of the villain. Volkov sent the message and waited. 3 minutes later, his phone rang. Unknown number, but he knew who it was. Major Volkov. The voice was elderly but strong, cultured, with the confidence of someone accustomed to authority. I received your message. General Hartley. Let's dispense with the hostility, shall we? I understand you've been investigating your great-grandfather's death. I respect family loyalty, even when it's misguided. Volkov forced himself to remain calm. I have evidence that Dmitri discovered a German infiltration network involving multiple planted agents. Klaus Weber was just one component of a larger operation. And you're willing to share this evidence? I'm willing to discuss how it should be presented. The world doesn't need to know that Operation Nightingale was mass murder. It could be remembered as a difficult but necessary decision that prevented catastrophic intelligence compromise. Hartley was silent for a moment. What do you want in return? Recognition for my great-grandfather. Acknowledgement that he died serving the Allied cause, not as a victim of friendly fire. His family deserves that truth. That's all? You're offering me a way to preserve my legacy in exchange for a posthumous medal for your great-grandfather? And acknowledgement that the other 11 prisoners were genuine Soviet soldiers, not collaborators or criminals. They deserve proper burial with honors. Another pause. Volkov could hear Hartley thinking, calculating, trying to determine if this was genuine or a trap. Major Volkov, you understand that if I meet with you, it will be recorded by multiple intelligence agencies. Anything I say will be analyzed by people looking for any excuse to damage American credibility. That's why we meet at the embassy. Neutral ground, official setting. You can have your attorneys present. I'm not trying to ambush you, General. I'm trying to find a resolution that serves the truth without destroying reputations that don't deserve destruction. You're very clever, Major, using my own legacy as leverage. I'm using the truth as leverage. You made a decision in 1943 that you believed was necessary. I'm offering you a chance to explain the decision before history judges you as simply a murderer. Hartley laughed, a dry sound. History has already judged me, Major. I'm a Cold War hero, 3 presidential medals, author of definitive texts on intelligence ethics. The man who made hard choices so others didn't have to. And the man who buried 12 prisoners alive to cover up a security failure. The line went silent. When Hartley spoke again, his voice had lost its grandfatherly warmth. Be very careful what accusations you make, Major Volkov. Herman Fisher learned that lesson last night. Fisher died of a heart attack. Yes, very convenient timing, just like the 4 researchers who had accidents over the years, just like your great-grandfather's suffocation in those tunnels. Hartley's tone was casual, almost conversational. I've been managing unfortunate accidents for 69 years, Major. I'm very good at it. Volkov felt cold rage, but he kept his voice steady. Then meet me tomorrow at the embassy. Prove that your decision was strategic necessity, not criminal conspiracy, unless you're afraid that your justifications won't survive official scrutiny. I'll be there at 2:00 p.m. But, Major, I'm bringing documentation that will prove Operation Nightingale saved thousands of Allied lives. I'm bringing proof that your great-grandfather's death, while tragic, was necessary to prevent catastrophic intelligence failure. Are you prepared to accept that truth? I'm prepared to hear your explanation. Good. Tomorrow, then. I look forward to educating you about how real intelligence work operates. Hartley ended the call. Elena had been listening on speaker. He admitted to killing Fisher. He admitted to the accidents. He threatened you directly, all on a recorded line. Is it admissible as evidence? In Germany? Absolutely. In the U.S.? Probably not, but it establishes pattern and intent. She pulled up embassy security protocols on her laptop. Tomorrow's meeting will be in a conference room with official recording equipment. German diplomatic staff will be present as witnesses. Whatever Hartley says will be documented by multiple parties. What if he realizes it's a trap? Then he doesn't show up, and his absence becomes part of the story. But I don't think he'll refuse. Men like Hartley believe they're smarter than everyone else. He thinks he can control you, can spin his justifications in a way that preserves his legacy. He doesn't realize that his own arrogance is his weakness. Volkov spent the rest of the day preparing. He reviewed every piece of evidence, organized Dmitri's intelligence reports chronologically, studied the timeline of Operation Nightingale. He contacted Dr. Schneider in Munich, who'd been released after 6 hours of American questioning. She confirmed that the university had filed diplomatic protests and that German authorities were investigating unauthorized U.S. intelligence operations on their territory. That evening, Elena briefed him on interrogation techniques. Don't attack him directly. Let him talk. Men like Hartley love to explain how clever they were, how they made decisions nobody else could make. Give him that platform. Let him hang himself with his own words. What if he brings lawyers who prevent him from saying anything incriminating? Then you release the additional evidence, Dmitri's reports, Fisher's testimony, the pattern of dead researchers. Even without a confession, the accumulation of proof will destroy his reputation. But a confession, a recording of Hartley explaining why he buried 12 men alive, that's the weapon that ends this war. Volkov barely slept that night. He kept seeing his great-grandfather's final words. Tell my family I died serving Soviet Union. Tell them I love them. Dmitri had known he was going to die, had accepted it, but he'd wanted the truth preserved, wanted his sacrifice to mean something beyond being another casualty statistic. Tomorrow, Volkov would honor that wish. Tomorrow, Richard Hartley would finally answer for what he'd done in March 1943. The U.S. Embassy in Berlin occupied a massive complex near the Brandenburg Gate. Security was intense, multiple checkpoints, metal detectors, armed guards. Volkov arrived at 1:45 p.m., accompanied by Elena Rostov and 2 Russian diplomatic staff. The Americans had agreed to the meeting under protest, but German authorities had made it clear that refusing would create its own diplomatic incident. The conference room was on the 4th floor, windowed, professional, with recording equipment visible on the table. Present were Major Alexei Volkov, Dr. Elena Rostov, 2 Russian diplomats, 2 American Embassy legal counsel, and a German Foreign Ministry observer. Everyone understood this was being recorded by multiple parties. At 2:03 p.m., General Richard Hartley entered the room. He was smaller than Volkov had imagined. Age had diminished him physically, but his presence remained commanding. He wore a tailored suit with his medals displayed on the lapel. His attorneys flanked him, both looking uncomfortable with this entire proceeding. Hartley's eyes locked on Volkov immediately. Major Volkov, you look remarkably like your great-grandfather. Same intensity in the eyes. You knew my great-grandfather? I knew of him. Captain Dmitri Volkov was mentioned in several intelligence reports from Stalag VII-A. Resourceful officer. Ran an effective spy network inside the camp. Under different circumstances, we might have recruited him for post-war operations. They sat down across from each other. The German observer activated the official recording equipment. This meeting is being documented by the Federal Republic of Germany at the request of both parties. Please state your names and purposes for the record. After formalities were completed, Hartley leaned back in his chair with the ease of someone used to controlling rooms. Major Volkov, you mentioned having additional evidence about German infiltration operations. I'd like to see this evidence. Volkov pulled out copies of Dmitri's intelligence reports. My great-grandfather documented Klaus Weber's true identity and his mission to infiltrate Soviet partisan networks. He also identified irregularities, suggesting Weber wasn't working alone. Hartley studied the documents, his expression unreadable. Captain Volkov was a perceptive intelligence officer. Yes, Weber was part of a larger German operation. Operation Falk, if I recall correctly. The Germans had planted approximately 15 agents into various Soviet prisoner groups between 1942 and 1943. And you knew about this? Allied intelligence knew. We'd intercepted German communications about the operation. Weber was one of several agents we were tracking. Hartley's voice took on a professorial tone. The question became, how do we neutralize these agents without revealing that we'd broken German codes? One of his attorneys leaned forward. General, I advise you to be careful about discussing classified operations. Hartley waved him off. It's been 69 years. The statute of limitations on operational security has long expired. Major Volkov deserves to understand the context of his great-grandfather's death. Then explain it, Volkov said quietly. Operation Nightingale was authorized by the Combined Chiefs of Staff in February 1943. The objective was to eliminate German infiltrators without exposing our code-breaking capabilities or damaging Allied Soviet intelligence cooperation. Hartley pulled out his own documents, official-looking papers with declassification stamps. We identified 12 German agents who'd been planted in various POW camps. The decision was made to contain the threat before they could reach partisan networks. Contain? That's an interesting euphemism for murder. It was elimination of enemy combatants engaged in espionage operations. 11 of those 12 prisoners were genuine Soviet soldiers. Hartley's expression didn't change. Yes? Unfortunately, the German agents had integrated so thoroughly into prisoner groups that extraction without compromise was impossible. The calculation was made that sacrificing 11 men to prevent hundreds of Allied deaths was acceptable. The German observer was taking detailed notes. One of Hartley's attorneys looked increasingly uncomfortable. "Who made that calculation?" Volkov asked. "I did. As the OSS officer responsible for that sector, the decision fell to me." Hartley's voice carried no remorse. Lieutenant Richard Hartley, aged 23, authorized the sealing of tunnel networks beneath Stalag VII-A to prevent German infiltration of Soviet partisan operations. You murdered 12 men. I prevented a catastrophic intelligence failure. Klaus Weber alone knew the identities of 40 Soviet partisan commanders. If he'd reached them, entire networks would have been compromised. Hundreds of Allied operatives would have been captured and killed. Volkov pulled out Dmitri's final report, the one written hours before the tunnels were sealed. My great-grandfather warned you about Weber. He offered to expose the infiltration without compromising your codes. He gave you another option. Hartley read the document carefully. When he looked up, something like respect flickered in his eyes. Your great-grandfather was correct. We could have exposed Weber through Captain Volkov's intelligence, but that would have revealed how deeply German intelligence had penetrated Soviet operations. It would have damaged Allied Soviet trust at a critical moment in the war. So you killed them all to preserve political relationships. I killed them all to preserve strategic cooperation that saved millions of lives. Hartley leaned forward. Major, you're a military officer. You understand operational necessity. Sometimes commanders make decisions that sacrifice individuals to protect the larger mission. That's not murder. That's war. War has rules. You executed prisoners without trial, without authorization from commanding officers, without giving them any chance at survival. I had authorization from the Combined Chiefs. I have the orders right here. Hartley produced a document with official stamps and signatures. Operation Nightingale was classified ultra-secret, the highest level of wartime classification. The 12 prisoners were designated as compromised assets whose elimination served Allied interests. The German observer spoke up. General Hartley, you're admitting to executing 12 prisoners of war on German soil? I'm admitting to conducting an authorized intelligence operation that eliminated enemy infiltrators and unavoidable collateral casualties. There's a legal distinction. Not under current international law, the German official replied. The Geneva Conventions are quite clear about the treatment of prisoners. The Geneva Conventions weren't ratified until 1949. In 1943, we operated under different rules. Volkov felt his carefully maintained composure cracking. You sealed those tunnels, knowing the men would suffocate. You heard them screaming as the air ran out. Hermann Fischer told me everything. Ah, yes, Herr Fischer, such a tragedy about his heart attack. Hartley's expression was sympathetic, but his eyes were cold. Old age is unforgiving, isn't it? So many veterans dying before they can share their stories. You had Fischer killed? I had nothing to do with Herr Fischer's unfortunate passing. He was 94 years old with documented heart conditions, natural causes. Just like the 4 researchers who died over the past 30 years? I'm not responsible for the natural mortality rate among elderly academics. Volkov pulled out the list Fischer had compiled. Dr. Margaret Wilson fell from a train platform in 1987. Thomas Brennan, car accident in 1995. Professor Hans Dietrich, drowned in 2003. Dr. Yuri Kozlov, heart attack in 2008. All investigating Stalag VII-A, all dying before they could publish. Hartley examined the list. Unfortunate coincidences. People die, Major Volkov, especially people who pursue dangerous research in unstable conditions. You're not even denying it? I'm observing that correlation doesn't prove causation. You're suggesting that I, a retired intelligence officer, somehow orchestrated the deaths of 4 people across 3 decades in different countries. That would require resources and coordination that I simply don't possess. But Volkov had seen the flicker in Hartley's eyes. The old man was proud of what he'd done, proud of his ability to protect this secret for 69 years. His arrogance was going to destroy him. General Hartley, let me be direct. I have my great-grandfather's complete intelligence reports. I have Hermann Fischer's testimony recorded before his death. I have forensic evidence from the tunnel site. I have the timeline of researcher deaths. And now I have your admission that you ordered the sealing of those tunnels. An admission of conducting an authorized wartime operation. An admission that will be judged by modern standards, in modern courts, under modern international law. Volkov leaned forward. Your legacy is over, General. The only question now is whether you're remembered as a pragmatic officer who made a terrible but necessary decision, or as a war criminal who murdered prisoners and then spent 7 decades eliminating witnesses. Hartley's attorneys were frantically whispering to him, but he ignored them. His focus was entirely on Volkov. You think you've won because you found some old documents and got a senile German guard to tell you stories? Major, I've been fighting battles like this since before you were born. I know how to manage information, control narratives, protect operational security. Then why are you here? Why are you admitting everything on a recording that will be distributed to multiple governments? For the first time, uncertainty crossed Hartley's face. He looked around the conference room as if really seeing it for the first time. The recording equipment, the German observer taking detailed notes, the Russian diplomats documenting everything. His own attorneys looking horrified. He'd walked into a trap believing he could control it, believing his explanations would justify his actions, believing that his 69 years of credibility could overcome any evidence. This meeting is over, one of Hartley's attorneys said firmly. General Hartley will not be making any further statements. But Hartley waved him off again. No, Major Volkov deserves the complete truth. He turned back to Volkov. Yes, I ordered the tunnels sealed. Yes, I knew the men would die. Yes, I authorized Operation Nightingale, knowing it meant executing 12 prisoners. And yes, over the decades, I ensured that certain problematic researchers experienced unfortunate accidents before they could compromise ongoing operations. The room went silent. Hartley's attorneys looked like they wanted to physically restrain him. "Your great-grandfather was a good man, Major Volkov, but he was in the wrong place at the wrong time with the wrong information. Klaus Weber's infiltration would have cost hundreds of Allied lives. I made the choice to sacrifice 12 men to save hundreds. That's not murder. That's command." The German observer spoke quietly into his recorder. "General Richard Hartley has admitted to ordering the execution of 12 prisoners of war in 1943 and to involvement in the deaths of multiple civilians over subsequent decades." Hartley seemed to realize what he'd done. His face went pale. Volkov felt no triumph, only exhausted sadness. "My great-grandfather died believing the Allies would help him. He trusted your promise of extraction, and you buried him alive for that trust. I did what was necessary." But Hartley's voice had lost its certainty. He was an old man now, 92 years old, facing the collapse of everything he'd built. The German observer stood. "General Hartley, I'm informing you that the Federal Republic of Germany will be opening a formal investigation into war crimes committed on German territory in 1943. Your testimony here will be submitted as evidence." One of Hartley's attorneys finally intervened. "General, we're leaving. Now, don't say anything else." They escorted Hartley out of the conference room, the old man moving slowly as if he'd aged decades in the past hour. After they left, Elena Rostov turned to Volkov. "You did it. You got him to confess on record." "He admitted everything," the German observer confirmed. "This recording will be presented to the International Criminal Court. Whether they have jurisdiction over a 69-year-old case is uncertain, but it will be investigated." Volkov sat in the conference room long after everyone else had left, thinking about his great-grandfather's final moments. Dmitri had known he was going to die, had accepted it, but he'd spent his last conscious hours documenting the truth, scratching messages into tunnel walls, hiding intelligence reports behind false walls. All so that someday someone would know what really happened, that someone was Volkov, and he'd honored his great-grandfather's sacrifice by ensuring the truth finally emerged from 7 decades of darkness. His secure phone buzzed with a news alert. The story was already breaking. American general admits to World War II crimes in recorded confession. Within hours, it would be everywhere. Richard Hartley's carefully constructed legacy would crumble. His books would be pulled from publication. His medals would be revoked. At 92, he would spend whatever time remained facing the justice he'd escaped for 69 years. Volkov called Dr. Schneider in Munich. "Greta, can you arrange for the remains from the tunnels to be transferred to Russian custody?" "Of course. When do you want them?" "As soon as possible. Captain Dmitri Volkov is coming home, and this time he's coming home as a hero." 6 months later, Volkov stood in a military cemetery outside Moscow as his great-grandfather was finally laid to rest with full honors. The Russian government had declared Captain Dmitri Volkov a hero of the Soviet Union for his intelligence work and his sacrifice in attempting to prevent German infiltration. The 11 other prisoners from the tunnels were buried alongside him, their families finally knowing the truth about their deaths. Their headstones bore inscriptions honoring their service and acknowledging that they'd died at the hands of Allied intelligence, not German captors. Volkov's grandmother attended the ceremony. At 70, she moved slowly, but her mind remained sharp. She touched Dmitri's casket with trembling hands. "I always knew," she whispered. "I always knew my Dmitri was too strong, too clever to die in a winter storm. He was alive, fighting, until someone decided his life didn't matter." "He mattered, babushka. The whole world knows that now." The ceremony included representatives from multiple governments. The German Foreign Ministry issued a formal apology for the role German territory played in the deaths. The British government acknowledged that Allied intelligence had failed in its duty to protect prisoners who'd provided valuable service. Even the United States sent a representative, though the official American position remained that Operation Nightingale had been a legitimate wartime operation. Richard Hartley had not attended. He was under house arrest in Virginia, awaiting extradition hearings. The International Criminal Court had opened formal proceedings, though legal experts debated whether 69-year-old war crimes fell within their jurisdiction. But regardless of legal outcomes, Hartley's reputation was destroyed. His books were out of print. His medals had been revoked. The intelligence community had disavowed him completely. After the ceremony, Volkov received a call from the director of the Russian POW MIA Recovery Division. "Major Volkov, your investigation has opened doors we thought were permanently sealed. We're creating a new unit to investigate Cold War-era incidents where official stories may not tell complete truth. We want you to lead it." Volkov looked at his great-grandfather's grave, at the 11 other headstones marking men who died because powerful people valued secrecy over justice. He thought about Herman Fisher's sacrifice, about the 4 researchers who died trying to expose the truth, about how close this secret had come to being buried forever. "I accept the position." "Excellent. Your first case involves missing Soviet officers from the Prague Uprising in 1945. Files suggest possible similar patterns of Allied intelligence operations gone wrong." There were other secrets out there, Volkov knew. Other conspiracies. Other families who deserved to know what really happened to their heroes. Captain Dmitry Volkov's mission was complete, but Major Alexei Volkov's work was just beginning. As the mourners departed, leaving flowers on fresh graves, Volkov stayed behind. He stood before his great-grandfather's headstone, reading the inscription, "Captain Dmitry Volkov, 1918 to 1943, hero of the Soviet Union, died exposing enemy infiltration and betrayed by those he trusted. His sacrifice saved countless Allied lives. His truth survived 69 years of lies." "I finished your mission, Dadushka," Volkov said quietly. "The world knows what happened. Richard Hartley will face justice. Your death mattered." The wind moved through the cemetery, rustling leaves like whispers from the past. Somewhere, Volkov felt his great-grandfather's approval, felt the satisfaction of a mission finally completed across 3 generations. Some secrets stay buried only until someone is brave enough to dig them up. Some truths wait decades for the right person to tell them. Some conspiracies can only be defeated by people willing to risk everything for justice. Captain Dmitry Volkov had started that fight in a dark tunnel in 1943, scratching truth into stone walls with his dying breath. Major Alexei Volkov had finished it in a Berlin conference room in 2011, forcing a war criminal to confess after 69 years of lies. And somewhere between those 2 moments, separated by 7 decades and 3 generations, justice had finally been served.